Okay, welcome everyone. We're going to get rolling. My name is Elena Past. I am the chair of the President's Standing Committee on Environmental Initiatives and the teacher of this course, which is a global studies course at Wayne State University. We're thrilled to be welcoming my students and then some special guests and audience members to our class today. This is an event titled Planet WSU, Observing, Inhabiting, Reimagining Our Campus, and it's part of Wayne State's celebration of Sustainability in Higher Education Month. Just a couple of housekeeping notes. We are keeping your videos off and ask that you make sure your microphones are muted during the event so that we can feature our speakers. We will have the chat open, and we invite you all to ask questions or to let us know if you have anything you'd like to ask the speakers. Throughout the event, we won't take questions until all of the speakers have presented, but we'll keep track of those questions and we'll ask as many as we can at the end of the event. It's now my great pleasure to introduce my colleague and friend, Daryl Pearson, who is in charge of sustainability, the Office of Campus Sustainability at Wayne State. He's going to say a few words about Green Street and the work of the Office of Campus Sustainability. And then we have a lineup of 4 fantastic speakers. So Daryl.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Daryl Pearson, as Elena just said. And as she mentioned, Green Street is truly a celebration. We started with recognition of Earth Day for a number of years, and Earth Day always falls during finals. So we wanted to shift our recognition of environmental efforts, of sustainability, to a time when more people could really be a part of it, and so especially students. And so October is Sustainability in Higher Education Month, and so it's very important that we put together some recognition of the efforts and the information that we can share with the greater campus community. Just quickly, I'd like to share a story with you. In 2002, a small group of students, challenged the university to start recycling. And, while the university wasn't really ready to embrace recycling at that time, those students were undeterred. They kept pushing. They had recycling events where they would collect bottles, paper, cardboard, really challenging the university and continuously not giving up. And so in 2006, the university finally said, let's look at sustainability, let's look at the environment and ways that we can address environmental concerns. And so the president at the time charged a number of people to look into it, and they came back with a number of recommendations. And one of those was to start a recycling program. So that started from a group of students really caring about recycling, being passionate, not giving up, pushing. And so as you listen to today, and if you're able to join other Green Street events, and you find something that really is important to you, and you have an idea, get involved. If there's something that you want to share, please share it, because little things start from small ideas, or big things start from small ideas and they grow. And so from that effort, and then in 2006, when the president said, well, let's look at what we can do, the farmers market came out of that, the recycling program came out of that, the Office of Campus Sustainability, where I work, came out of that. We now conduct greenhouse gas inventories annually. We're looking at renewable energy. We're really concerned about our green building, making sure that the buildings that we develop and renovate and build are green buildings. So a lot of things came off of a small effort. And so today, I'd really like to challenge you to think big and to get involved, because it's really important. And there's a number of students that volunteer and work with the Sustainability Office. And if you're interested, if you want to get involved, I invite you all to come out, check us out, and see what we're all about. So Thanks, Elena, for allowing me to say a few words, and I'm looking forward to hearing all the great speakers that we have today. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Daryl. So just a moment's quick welcome to all of you. This is an Introduction to Global Stories class. It's part of the Global Studies program at Wayne State, and we've just started a module on thinking about global climate and environment. So our stellar lineup of speakers today are going to be talking about both the local and the global, about city and campus ecologies, about planning for sustainability, how we report and narrate stories about the future of our planet. I'm going to introduce each speaker before they speak and thank them in advance for their amazing willingness to share their knowledge and their expertise. So our first speaker today is Michelle Serreyn, who is a science education graduate student and a native plant enthusiast with 20 years of experience with native plants and wildlife habitat, as well as environmental education. She's currently partnering with the Detroit Audubon and the Great Lakes Safe Passage, monitoring bird window strikes around campus. And she's working with students in the Detroit Biodiversity Network to maintain campus green infrastructure and research gardens. So when you're able to return to campus, she's going to show you some of the things that you can check out right in the heart of Wayne State. So Michelle, thank you.
Thank you, Elena. Hi, everyone. I want to start with kind of an overview of what we want to talk about today, and then we're going to go from the general to the specific. And we really want to look at campus and the community around us and think about how we can make this a more sustainable and biodiverse setting, not only for people, but for wildlife as well, because we all have to work together and we all contribute to this ecosystem. So historically, Michigan was a patchwork of ecosystems, and an ecosystem is all of the living and non-living factors in an area interacting with one another. So the plants, the wildlife, the microbes, the soils, the weather. And these ecosystems also touch areas with each other at the edges. And at that point, that's where we have our greatest diversity. And when we talk about diversity, we're talking about wildlife and plants and microbes, but also the conditions that they're in. And ecosystems provide a lot of services for us and for the wildlife. They clean our water and air. They provide food and habitat. They just do so many things that we can't replicate the same way they can. Now, this is what Michigan may have looked like historically, and you'll see by the key that most of that was forested. Most ecosystems are noted by their dominant plant type, in this case, trees. And a lot of that disappeared in our history due to logging, agriculture, and now more development and urbanization. And with that change, we have lost a lot of our native species, or they've been decreased in numbers. And these are the plants and animals that were here prior to European settlement. Since the area has grown and globalization has taken place, we've also introduced a lot of non-native species. So plants and animals from other parts of the world and even other regions of the United States that weren't here endemically. And that has an impact not only on the wildlife and the plants, but on the ecosystem services that they naturally provide. So we want to try and get back to some of this a little bit if we can. We can't recreate what we've lost, but we can think about how we can bring some of those factors back. Want to narrow this down a little to Wayne County. There are county maps that were developed by the Michigan Natural Features Inventory based on land surveys from the early 1800s that can kind of give us a picture of what was around in each of the counties in Michigan. And the little yellow star you see there is about where Midtown is. So if you look at the key, you can see that right around where we are now, at least where I am right now, since I'm on Wayne State's campus, it was mixed hardwood swamp. Well, what does that mean? That means it was dominated by trees. It was wet during certain periods of the year, especially in the spring. There was a lush undergrowth because of that wetness that was adapted to the shade. And this is a great place for a lot of organisms, especially amphibians. A lot of them depend on these temporary wet areas for reproduction. Also home to a lot of mosquitoes. So Michigan had a bit of a bad reputation for a while in the early 1800s and wasn't settled as early as some of the other states around us. But this is a really rich and diverse area. Needless to say, that's not quite what it looks like anymore. As you can see from the air, this is Wayne County now, according to Google Maps, and a lot of it has become developed. But not all is lost. We do have some remnants of what used to be here, such as the Sibley Prairie Nature Preserve, which has captured some of the Lake Plain prairie that was endemic to this region. If we take a look at our area of Wayne County, we can see Midtown is highly developed, but we still have a lot of green space around us. A lot of that's planted trees from city projects and nonprofit organizations trying to get those trees planted for people and for wildlife. We also have little gems like Belle Isle. But Wayne State, not quite so much. We do have some green space, but that doesn't mean we're not attractive to wildlife, and it doesn't mean we don't have the ecosystem services that these plants and animals can provide. What we can do, though, is help supplement that in a number of different ways. One thing I do want to mention is that we are on a migratory flyway. So birds that head further north for their breeding ranges start passing through here this time of the year, and they're looking for what we call stopover habitats. I used to characterize it as McDonald's for birds. Quick drop in, rest for the evening, or during the day, forage a little to build up their food reserves, and then head out on their way further south. This, of course, happens in the reverse in the springtime. So we're getting a lot of birds passing through this area right now, and they're using Wayne State's campus as that McDonald's. Birds such as this ovenbird that you see on the left. This is a small warbler. It's an understory bird, so that means it would be foraging on the forest floor amid all the plants and leaf litter. And we've got great spaces for them on campus. And they can actually find the insects and other foods that they need here. They also find some obstacles. In this case, our buildings. I'm working with Detroit Audubon, as Elena mentioned, and mapping the birds that strike the buildings and are either stunned or killed as a result. And you can see some of the data here that we've collected from the spring. We're also working on it this fall with a number of volunteers. So we have some areas here that aren't safe for birds, but we are working on trying to make it safer for them. So as we build the habitat here on campus, bring in those plants that can provide that and the ecosystem services that we can take advantage of, we also have to take a look at how we can mitigate any negative impacts that we may have along the way. So here's a great space on campus that provides habitat for both people and wildlife. I've seen plenty of students hang hammocks here and hang out, use the shade. These are great windbreaks in this space because we know how windy campus can get. And of course, the wildlife can use this area for food and shelter both. But it's not ideal. Spaces like this in a natural environment would have understory other than grass, leaf litter, pine needles in this case, a number of plants and shrubs that would also help provide those ecosystem services and lend more to this space than what we have now. We have a lot of beautiful plants on campus, but not all of them are great for wildlife. In this particular case, this plant, you'll notice there are no holes in the leaves, so that means no insects are eating it. It doesn't produce flowers that pollinators can use, so no insects would be using it as a food source for that either. It can provide some shelter for wildlife, but that's about it. So this is a more sterile type plant and not necessarily what we would want in our campus wildlife areas. We do have some plants that can provide services. These are crabapple trees, which we have in abundance across campus. They bloom in the spring. have great nectar and pollen. The birds will forage in them for small insects, use them for shelter. But it's all we have, and it comes in a big burst at one period of time, and then that's about it. So we want to take a look at how we can mitigate this, build it up a little more. And not only will this attract and provide habitat for wildlife, but it also gives us what we call green infrastructure. And green infrastructure seeks to mimic some of the ecosystem services, in our case, stormwater mitigation, that natural systems would. So we can take advantage of the services that these ecosystems provide, especially the plants in these ecosystems, for cleaning our air and cleaning our water, providing shade, providing habitat, and taking care of our stormwater. So to that end, students in the Detroit Biodiversity Network and some of our partner organizations, such as Sierra Club and Friends of the Rouge, have worked together to put in some of these green infrastructure areas. So up at the north end of campus, we have our bioswale, which is almost 2 years old now. So the Detroit Biodiversity Network students raised the plants in the greenhouse on top of Science Hall. We also purchased some. They did the plan for this site, planted it, and they maintain it. We just got some accolades from some of the people that work here, including the head of research, Steve Lanier. He said, hey, this is great, this is beautiful. We've seen monarchs here, we've seen goldfinches here. It's doing what it needs to do. It's taking the water from the parking lot, filtering it through the rocks, the soil, and the roots of the plants, and keeping it from going down the storm drain and thus out into the river. So it's doing a lot of great things. And not only that, it's pretty, and this is just within just over a year's time. We also have an older bioswale at Lot 12 right across Woodward from the iBio building. This was also planted by the DBN students and our partner organizations, plus some volunteers. It's about 3 years old now. This is a little more diverse and a little wilder. And it's so wild that we have upped the insect population dramatically. We've got lots of birds that use it. And a few weeks ago, I was there weeding and flushed a ring-necked pheasant out of the middle of a parking lot in an urban setting in Detroit. To me, this is pretty amazing. So we're doing what we can to build up those spaces. Last fall in Lot 12, we also planted the corners with 4 different species of milkweed. This is a plant that's very important, of course, to the monarch butterfly because this is what their caterpillars feed on. They're also great nectar plants for other insects and birds like hummingbirds. We planted 4 different species, 1 in each corner. And Glenn Hood, one of our professors in biology, is taking the flowers and checking to see what pollinators are visiting each of those different species at different times through the growing season. This is just the first full year these plants have been in, and already we've transformed this space. The Detroit Biodiversity Networks were contacted by Parking and Transportation and Economic Development here at Wayne State to design and plant gardens at Woodward and Warren in our pocket park. So these gardens are flourishing as well. And the great thing about these plants, they are native to Michigan. So they were here prior to European settlement. They provide habitat, which is food and shelter for wildlife. Once they are established, for the most part, they need little or no maintenance because they're adapted to our soils and our climate conditions here in Michigan. So you plant them, they grow, and then the wildlife comes in. The day after we planted this site, we had a plant called Pussy Toes and some Pearly Everlasting. These are the native host plants for the painted lady butterfly caterpillars. And the next day, a painted lady butterfly was laying its eggs on those plants. So if you plant it, they will come. Behind the undergraduate library, we have our Warrior Garden, which started out as a place for students to raise vegetables and herbs, but we've kind of morphed it a little to include more native plants. We're using these sites to collect seed from these plants so that we can grow more on campus. And everybody is welcome to join us here in using these sites and maintaining them. We also have some small gardens scattered throughout campus in kind of odd spaces that are difficult to grow, like this shady spot by Science Hall. And this, what we lovingly term a hell strip behind the biological sciences building. It's sand and gravel, it's hot and dry, but these plants after 1 year are flourishing and the goldfinches are coming to eat the seeds already. These plants attract a lot of insects, which, as we know, are food for a lot of organisms. So the plants form the bottom layer of the food pyramid, or a food chain you may be more familiar with. Insects are often the next layer up, and they need their food and shelter plants in order to thrive. These pictures were all taken on campus here. So these are all different insects on campus, as are these. So we're getting some monarch and black swallowtail butterflies that are becoming adults. And that milkweed plant picture there, the little pink flowers, you'll see a lacewing, which is a predatory insect. So their balance is starting to happen. We're getting those insects are bringing in small birds, and those small birds are bringing in small bird predators, such as Cooper's hawks and our resident peregrine falcons that nest on the front of Old Main. If you're not familiar with it, you may have seen we have a camera up there that captures what's going on in that nest site, usually about from February through June when the nestlings are there. And these nestlings depend on foods such as birds that their parents provide for them, especially during migratory season. We not only have birds and insects on campus, we also have some mammals too. This is our resident opossum, which we've cited multiple times. Usually it's more nocturnal, so we don't see it, but it's hanging out there and cleaning up all the dead birds and other things they find on campus. So Planet Detroit was gracious enough to do an article about why biodiversity matters in urban areas like Detroit, and highlighted some of the things we've been doing on campus. So now where do we go from here? We've got these beginning things. Now we've got these spaces like Keast Commons. What can we do with this to make it ecologically sustainable, good for wildlife, and good for people? We've got the main campus mall. Looking pretty good so far with all the trees, but how can we improve it and make it better? Especially taking things like the rainwater off of those impermeable surfaces of the concrete and having them drain into areas so they aren't going into our storm drains and out to the river. And then our newest site here, the area outside of the STEM Innovation Center that's going to be begging for planting. So I'm going to be turning this over to Ashley Flintoff shortly, but I'm challenging you to decide what is it that we can do now in this space to make it more ecologically sustainable, to make it there for wildlife and for people, and to have it be something that will last a long time. So that challenge has been put out to all of you. Again, if you've got questions, please drop them into the chat and we'll be monitoring that. And I'm going to turn it over to Elena, who's going to introduce Ashley.
Thank you so much, Michelle. That was fantastic. And I love your closing questions, which is something my class will be contemplating. Just mention that I see some excellent questions coming up in the chat, and we will be coming back to questions at the end. But now I'm pleased to transition to the perfectly logical next area of our discussion, which is sustainability. So planning for that future that Michelle was asking you about. I should mention that Michelle is my co-organizer for this event. I'm sorry I didn't mention that before, but also a presenter. So Ashley Flintoff is the Director of Planning and Space Management for Wayne State University's Facilities Planning and Management Department. She has degrees from the University of Detroit Mercy, a Bachelor of Science in Architecture, and then a Master's of Community Development and a Master of Urban Planning from Wayne State. She's been an adjunct professor at U of D Mercy, covering topics like sustainability, social media for nonprofits, and presentation skills. So she really bridges that sustainability and storytelling. She's a founding board member and secretary treasurer of the Volterra Detroit Foundation, and just completed a 6-year term on the board of the Association for Community Design. She's also our neighbor in Midtown. If you live in Midtown, she is just around the corner in the Woodbridge neighborhood, restoring a Victorian house. So Ashley, thank you so much. We look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you so much, Elena. Is my screen showing up okay? I was having issues earlier, so I think it's good. Someone will tell me if it's not.
Although actually it's in, it's not in the main presentation mode.
So I need to switch it.
I think so.
Is that better?
Yep.
Okay. All right, good. Thank you. All right, so thank you so much. And Michelle is amazing. So I'm a little, I'm honored to follow her, but I don't know if I can live up to that. So I will try. But she talked about a lot of the things that we're actually thinking about in facilities as we start to think about what does the overall campus look like? How do you incorporate sustainability into an urban campus environment? So that is what I'm going to talk about today. So this is just a picture of iBio, although I'm realizing after Michelle's pictures, I probably should have picked another shot that highlighted our lovely bioswales a little bit more. So the question really is, how can we incorporate sustainability into campus planning, and specifically an urban campus? So I provided to Alana's class a case study about MIT's North Corridor, and I'm not going to go through that whole thing because it's quite long, but if you're interested, there's a lot of really great information in it. But essentially, MIT's campus is very similar in a lot of ways to Wayne State. They are a little bit closer to their river, to the Charles River, than we are, which is just a little bit up on the top of the off the map that I'm showing, but right there, they're across the street from it. But they have these two areas, their North Corridor and then a court that were highly trafficked, primarily service vehicles, cars went through there, delivery trucks, people, bikes, just a lot of traffic through there. And being very close to the Charles River, they deal quite a bit with flooding, with stormwater mitigation, etc. So when it came time for MIT to think about reworking these areas, they really had to take all of that into account and really had a chance to think more sustainably about some of their hardscape spaces while still allowing them to incorporate all of the traffic that they had to incorporate. So they couldn't just take these corridors and turn them into completely green spaces. They still had to have delivery trucks and pedestrians and other things coming through them. So the question is, how do you incorporate sustainability while still allowing the functions that need to occur? And so they looked at the corridor, they looked at integrating stormwater infrastructure, how do you distribute irrigation and accommodate some of the needs of the green space that you could provide, while also using that stormwater for other things such as irrigation. How do you filter it? How can you incorporate all of these things into very small spaces, very tightly packed spaces with a lot of infrastructure going on underneath the ground? So this was the court. This was the second area that they showed, and again, just kind of trying to think about how you incorporate all of these things, all of these water and gas lines and electrical, along with green space and functional hardscape. And so this is the result. I've been in this space actually a couple of years ago, and it's absolutely gorgeous. All of that paving is actually permeable. So the rainwater filters not only through the green spaces, but also filters through the hardscape as well. There's bicycles, there's pedestrians, there's delivery trucks. It's a beautiful and functional space that actually is quite amazing. So I would encourage you to, if you're in Boston, you know, when we're allowed to travel again, if you're able to go to Boston, go check this area out. It's absolutely gorgeous, and it functions very, very effectively. So now, how do we think about similar type interventions on our campus? So we have, I don't know if anyone knows this, but if you look at just the main campus and the medical campus, so not looking at any of our satellite campuses or anything like that, we have about 215 acres of land that we cover. A lot of that is covered with buildings. A lot of that is covered with hardscape, hard surfaces, impermeable surfaces. And so those are things that we really need to think about as we think about stormwater mitigation. We know that Southeastern Michigan struggles with that, with our combined storm sewer. And I think most people can remember just a few years ago when we had the 100-year floods and all of the freeways flooded and everything. And so how can we start to do our part to address that on our campus? So I also asked everyone to kind of take a look at the Wayne framework, which is our 2030 campus master plan that we just finished a year and a half ago, I think. And there's a lot of pieces in here. I'm not going to go through it all, but what I do want to highlight is really thinking about item 1 and item 3 here. So how do we organize our campus? How do we make it more welcoming both in a sense for the community, for students, faculty, and staff, and our neighbors as they traverse through. But how can we also, you know, in thinking about Michelle's talk, how can we think about making our campus more welcoming for our friends who are here before us, which is the pollinators, which is the wildlife, which is, you know, all of these biodiversity kind of concepts and functions that come through. How can we think about our campus in all of those ways? And then how can we really focus our strategies around how we build, where we build, and what we build, so that we're meeting the university's needs as far as their mission, as far as kind of making sure that we're providing the types of spaces that people need in order to get their education, but also how can we meet the needs of the planet. So one of the ideas was taking Gullen Mall and organizing it a little bit, creating more opportunities for green space. And when I say green space, I don't necessarily mean just grass, but what I mean is how can we think about incorporating more plant life into these areas. You see a lot of trees. And what this really imagined was taking the concept of Gullen Mall, which right now is a very large, very wide paved surface with tiny little bits of lawn along the sides, and then buildings. And so how can we flip that? How can we create more green space, especially down the center, which both allows us to incorporate more spaces for wildlife and for people to enjoy nature on an urban campus, but also allows us a lot of opportunity to think about stormwater mitigation, green stormwater infrastructure, similar to what MIT was thinking about, but maybe in a different way, like we put our Detroit spin on it. And then we still do need to provide pathways for emergency vehicles, for maintenance vehicles as well. So how can we kind of balance those two things and make spaces that function more holistically? So Michelle actually showed pictures of this. So I'm just going to show one more picture, but this is the start of kind of trying to implement those ideas from our master plan. So with our new STEM Innovation Learning Center, we had to tear up a lot of the hardscape in between the STEM building and the biology building for construction. This was our opportunity to rethink it. So this was taken a couple weeks ago. This should be hopefully planting pretty soon, but there's going to be trees down the middle of that. Right now there's grass, sorry, Michelle. But I think there's opportunity to think about different planting materials in there. We also incorporated several large, I mean, really large planters that we're hoping to work with students and the Biodiversity Network, with Michelle hopefully, and researchers to plant some native species in there, use them as examples, as test beds for some more of the research that folks are doing around biodiversity and native plantings on campus. And then this is an idea that we have an initial plan for that Keast Commons area. So that area where we just demolished Roy Apartments. So it's looking at creating different levels of landscape, incorporating bioswales, which are not fully called out here, but basically the dark green, most of the dark green area is bioswales, native plants, a lot of more ground cover, not ground cover is not the right word, but what Michelle was talking about, different levels. I think Michelle called it the understory of plantings around these areas, to think about how we can create spaces that still allow students and the community to have green space, to have recreation, to even just sit and enjoy, but also incorporate stormwater infrastructure, incorporate more native plantings, and just incorporate more green space in general into those areas. The other thing I want to just kind of highlight is what's happening with our neighbors just across Woodward, actually across Cass and then across Woodward in the cultural center. So I don't know how many people are familiar with the Cultural Center Planning Initiative that was started by the DIA and Midtown Detroit, Inc., and is finishing up their 18-month planning process right now. But this is an initial concept plan. They've developed it a little further since then, but this was their plan that they released about a year ago, I think. And the thing that I really love about this is, as you look at all of these different elements, and there's a lot going on here, you notice the different levels of green space. You'll notice this kind of meandering path that goes all the way through. So this is the DIA and the public library, the Wright Museum, the Science Museum, all of those kind of institutions working together. But what they're really talking about, what they're really looking at right now is how they can use that land to build in enough green water infrastructure to fully mitigate the 10-year flood. So the amount of water that comes through at what would be classified as a 10-year flood, how they can incorporate different species and different layers of plantings and trees and undergrowth to further increase the biodiversity in this area. So just kind of end with this question about what does the future of campus planning look like to you? How do we think about all of these things and still provide, we're not going to be able to completely tear down every single building, make the campus a full forest, but what can we do that incorporates both the needs of the earth and the needs of humans into a kind of ecosystem that works for all of us and does good for the globe rather than does harm. And so I'll just end with one of my favorite quotes from Yamasaki, who designed quite a few gorgeous buildings on our campus and did some master planning for us back in the 40s and 50s. And he just said, and he's talking about the campus, and he's specifically talking about the McGregor Conference Center. When he said this, he said, we must escape the hubbub and chaos of our daily lives and provide a place where humanity can think. So on that, I will turn it back to Elena. Thank you so much.
Ashley, thank you. That was fantastic. It's exciting to see campus. I haven't seen that new development near the new STEM building. And we have some really great questions coming in, both about biodiversity and also about concerns with how you manage planning for when you have to worry about economic questions as well. So, and I think that's going to be a question that the Planet Detroit team can address, because Planet Detroit is a storytelling hub that is very concerned with how you speak about sustainability in the city of Detroit. So a lot of what they are thinking about is questions of environmental justice. So I'm really excited to turn the mic over to Nina Mizuraka Ignaczak, an award-winning Detroit-based freelance journalist and a documentary filmmaker. She writes and produces stories about the environment, place, and identity, and has had work published all over the place in the Huffington Post, the Detroit Free Press, Crane's Detroit Business, Business Insider, Belt Magazine, Curbed, Model D, and more. But we are excited that she is the founder, publisher, and editor of Planet Detroit, a digital media startup that tells Detroit's environmental stories while building a community of engaged readers who are empowered and informed to act personally and publicly. So Nina, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. Everybody can hear me okay? All right.
Yes, you sound great.
So Planet Detroit is a 1.5-year-old independent nonprofit news startup. We do explanatory and investigative journalism and breaking news. We're funded right now by the Facebook Journalism Project, Solutions Journalism Network, Community Foundation for Southeast Michigan, Society for Environmental Journalists, and we also are funded by our readers. As Lena said, our mission is to raise awareness about Metro Detroit's environmental and public health issues, hold powerful entities accountable, and help our audience connect with the local environment. This is who we are, plus a lot of freelancers. So we have 2 reporters, Jenna Brooker and Brian Allnut, and our intern, who is no longer with us but still in touch, Eve Washington, as well as a whole slew of freelance writers. So we want to start by talking about the environmental justice issues that we're addressing in our reporting. We provide information for and about Detroit's most vulnerable neighborhoods. I think if you live and go to school in the Detroit area, you're probably already aware of a lot of this demographic information. Detroit being a mostly almost 80% Black community, with a healthy Latinx community as well, and a lot of immigrants, a lot of disconnection from the internet and from communities based on transportation barriers and such. But we also know that the environmental and health crises that we face disproportionately impact those communities. They face higher rates of pollution, exposure to pollution, failing infrastructure, lack of reliable transportation, food insecurity, and blight, and those are the issues that we are focused on. We are building something that we hope is built by and for Detroiters impacted by those issues, and we are dedicated to daylighting facts and information that support their needs, challenges, and solutions. We work by working with the community. We convene a multidisciplinary community-based advisory group that helps ensure that we are reflecting the community needs in our editorial approach. We work in partnership with a variety of organizations, including other media organizations, as well as the Detroit Equity Action Lab at Wayne State. And we actively make the effort to hire journalists representing these communities, whether it's writers or photographers. I guess I'll skip this because I think that's probably a little bit of a duplicate slide. Some of the questions we're asking, we are looking into the long-term situation with water shutoffs and energy shutoffs in Detroit. We're curious about asthma rates and air pollution and what is going on with some of the data that we see. We're very interested in how climate risks will impact Detroiters now and in the future. How hazardous facilities in the region may be threatened by climate induced natural disasters or weather events. And in particularly how COVID-19 has been interacting with the environmental stressors and racial inequity faced by Detroiters. We're also looking at solutions. We're looking at who's working to address these issues, how they're succeeding, where are the gaps, as well as trying to provide information for individuals that they can take to empower themselves and identify the systemic changes that need to happen. We have a couple of projects going on right now. We're wrapping up this Planet Detroit Environmental Justice Reporting Project. It's really just a special funding source. We're going to be continuing to report on environmental justice. But these are some areas in the map here you can see that are identified as some of the highest environmental injustice census tracts, so areas that are exposed to the most pollution and have the most inequity identified, and that was through a U of M study. And so we're looking to report on what's happening in those areas. This is some of the reporting that's come out of that. We've looked at the affordability plan proposed by activists in Detroit. We're looking at what's happening with US Ecology on the east side. We're looking at what's going on with the FCA expansion. There's been it's been touted as, bringing a lot of jobs, but also bringing pollution to the east side. We're looking at environmental organizations and whether they're representing the communities they serve and how they're working to change kind of being all white. We're also wrapping up a project called Detroiters Do Science. The article by Allison was mentioned, and I think you'll be hearing from her next, looking at biodiversity in urban areas like Detroit. As part of that, we did a project to encourage our readers to document wildlife in their neighborhoods. So Detroiters Do Science is a project through the iNaturalist app. It's still going on, so if you want to try it out, you can download the app on your phone. And the map at the top right is a map of all of the identifications or entries that we've had into the system. So we've had about 5,600 observations of 1,600 species. We've gotten a lot of great participation, and it's been really exciting. I hope it's something that we continue to do next growing season. Oops. And some of the other stories that I just wanted to share, looking at open space in the city and access, looking at flooding on Belle Isle, looking at what you can do in your backyard with gardening, looking at some of the issues that environmental nonprofit leaders have been facing during the pandemic. These are all stories that you can find on our site. If you're interested in learning more, I encourage you to sign up for our weekly newsletter. You can find it at planetdetroit.org. Please, I think the organizers are going to share my contact information if you're interested in getting involved in our advisory groups or contributing. Please don't hesitate to contact me, and I'd love to talk to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nina. It's really fascinating to see that reporting initiative and all of the stories that Planet Detroit has told that are really uncovering some both inequities, but some great opportunities to get involved and to participate in documenting both environmental injustice and other ways to take care of wildlife and take care of our city. Next up, we have somebody who's done a lot of
Elena, I think your sound is messed up.
Is it?
Yeah.
How is it now? Can you hear me now?
Breaking up. It's very fuzzy.
Weird.
Yeah, I can hear you, but it's kind of broken up and kind of.
Maybe turn your mic off and turn it back on, Elena.
Yeah, it's really blurry.
Okay, I'm gonna try in this new format. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Is that working better? Okay.
Yes.
Switch devices. All right, so I'm really pleased to introduce Allison Torres Burtka, who's a freelance writer and editor who has written about local environmental and sustainability related issues for Planet Detroit, the Sierra Magazine, the Herb Institute at the University of Michigan, Model D, and Metro Mode. Her writing on topics including sustainability has appeared in The Guardian, Crane's Detroit Business, ESPNW, and Women's Running Magazine. So we're very excited now to have one of the storytellers who works with Planet Detroit and beyond joining us to talk about her work.
Thank you. So I've written these two articles for Planet Detroit, one of which Nina just mentioned, why biodiversity matters in urban areas like Detroit, and then another on Planet Detroit's Detroiters Do Science project, as she explained, is an iNaturalist app where Planet Detroit invited sort of citizen naturalists to record their observations. So in writing both of these articles, I sort of took a closer look at how people are interacting with and experiencing nature in both expected and unexpected places. And by expected places, I mean, parks with lots of greenery that you would typically think of when you think of biodiversity in our area, and also unexpected, less obvious places, like in this article I talked about how church gardens are being used that way, and the bioswales and parking lot sort of plantings that Michelle and Ashley were talking about. And even on a micro level, sort of people's individual flower pots at their homes that they might just have on their balconies. And so sort of looking at how biodiversity matters in both types of places and how all of that is contained in Detroit. And so in some of these less expected places, the people who were participating in this iNaturalist challenge and documenting their discoveries were kind of looking more closely than they might otherwise in this urban environment, where biodiversity might not be that apparent unless you're actually looking for it or thinking about it. And even some of the little tidbits that I came across that I learned as part of this process have really stuck with me and sort of changed the way I look at certain species. So for example, Erin Parker at Belle Isle, she's the Nature Center's manager there. So her job has something to do with nature, but she's not an expert on all these individual species. So she explained how cemeteries are biodiversity hotspots because they tend to have older native trees that are basically left undisturbed. There's not a whole lot of action around them, so they attract lots of animals and birds and insects and things. which help support native species and therefore help promote biodiversity. And also, she talked a bit about looking at the trees that are planted in trees that are planted or allowed to grow in residential areas and office and other areas. Like, she explained how native trees like willows are much better at supporting local native species than things like calorie pear, which are a really common tree planted in streets and things like that. But those trees don't support the species as much because they don't offer whatever the birds or the insects need. And another just fun little example is Leonard Weber is this sort of self-taught naturalist, and he leads nature walks when there isn't a COVID pandemic. He leads nature walks pretty much every day, I think, at Eliza Howell Park. And, red-tailed hawks are a commonly seen bird there, but he pointed out how red-tailed hawks their screech is really menacing. And so in movies and things like that, whenever there's an eagle or any sort of bird of prey like that, they always use the screech of the red-tailed hawk because it's so much louder and more like menacing than all the other birds comparatively. And then also I talked to Peggy Dankert, who lives near Rouge Park, which is Detroit's largest park. And she, got to know the park really well, became part of the board of Friends of Rouge Park. And I knew that they had seen herons there, that they frequently see herons there. But she said she had recently documented 50 different pairs of nesting great blue herons just along the river in Rouge Park, which I think is pretty amazing. So many of the people I talked to as part of this who talked to me about both their work and their participation in this iNaturalist project talked about this being an opportunity to sort of slow down, notice and appreciate their surroundings. And that's important because this sort of exposure to nature is good for your mental health and ability to concentrate. I think, we all think about going an immersive experience like going for a hike in the woods or something as being good for you mentally and physically, but studies have shown that even being able to see trees from the indoors through your window actually helps improve your mental health and ability to concentrate. I'll drop some links in the chat after this. But just like I said, people sort of talked about how taking a walk and noticing nature is good for the nature because then you appreciate it and you're aware of this biodiversity, but also for your mental health. So even if even if all you have is a window box outside your window and you have flowers planted there, then even just like noticing that a butterfly flies by and sits there, that might actually be helping you mentally. So looking at people sort of like, I see it as sort of a micro to macro appreciation of nature and awareness of biodiversity. And then beyond that, in a couple of things that I've done in other work that seem sort of tangential, I just wanted to bring up a couple other examples of things that people are doing in Detroit that are sort of revitalizing or rethinking existing spaces in creative ways. So they involve bees and camping. So I know Planet Detroit has covered the organization Bees in the D, and they have some beehives installed on rooftops and things like that around Detroit. And then another organization called Detroit Hives has installed beehives, and they've also taken some formerly abandoned lots and turned them into apiaries. They explained that a lot of the plants that grow in abandoned lots, although some of them may be considered weeds, they're still good for pollinators. And so in these lots that they've turned into apiaries, they give tours that educate people about the importance of honeybees and how we need them for our food, and that sort of make that connection between what we eat and what is in our neighborhoods. And so especially where in these places where they've installed these apiaries, it's sort of fun for them to make that connection. And so they also sell their honey, and like Slow's Barbecue uses their honey in some of its sauces. And sort of, I see this as an example of sort of making productive use out of typically underused outdoor spaces. And in the process, that helps preserve biodiversity and sort of enhance the sustainability of what's already there. And then the other example is camping in Detroit. Until recently, there was no place to camp in Detroit. And I think it's not something that a lot of people think about when they think of Detroit. But Bruges Park is a giant park. It's more than 1,100 acres. And there is a section of it that used to be a Boy Scout campground, but it's basically been abandoned and overgrown for decades. And this organization that has been formed as Detroit Outdoors, it is a partnership between the Detroit Park and Rec Department and a division of the Sierra Club and the YMCA of Metro Detroit. And so they have gotten together, sort of cleaned up this campground, and created a program that allows teachers and like youth group leaders to get trained on how to use camping equipment, and then they lend out the camping equipment so that they can take their groups of kids camping in Detroit. And so the benefits here are kind of, one, it revitalizes an existing space that no one had really been using other than animals. And it allows kids in Detroit to have the experience of immersing themselves in nature in a park that isn't very far from their home. And they get to appreciate nature in a way that they might not otherwise that way. And, you know, this sort of previously unused or underused section of the park was sort of dormant, and now it's been activated to engage the community. And there's plenty of biodiversity right there, even in this small section of the park. I know they've seen coyotes. I believe they've seen bald eagles as well. And sort of in all of these efforts, you know, the iNaturalist project and these bees and camping things, which are separate, I see sort of people appreciating the richness of nature in the city, in this urban environment of Detroit, and getting the benefits of exposure to nature and slowing down. And also sort of doing this, being aware of biodiversity in places that you might not expect them to. I'm gonna try to share my screen here to show a couple of, okay, this is the Detroit Hives website. I'll also put this in the chat. I'm having problems with this. Okay, here's an article I wrote about Detroit Hives for the Urban Institute. I just wanted to show you a couple of pictures of them. Here they are with some of their hives. This is an area that they redeveloped. So that was a previously abandoned lot that they turned into this, this beautiful apiary. And so they have school tours and things like that come through. Let me see. And then this is the Detroit Outdoors website. It sort of explains how their process works, how they get these youth group leaders and teachers trained, this camping gear that they lend out and train them how to use, and then they take kids camping there. And this is the article that I wrote about them. So I'll drop all this stuff in the chat, and I will turn this back over to Alana.
Awesome, thank you. I hope I'm not having my problems with my mic anymore. I'm going to share my screen, which includes a couple of questions the presenters have proposed for all of you to think about. And then we're going to go to some questions. Let's see, that might not be the right display. Hopefully this is the right display. So we're going to invite you all to ask questions in the chat. And I know there were questions coming in throughout the presentations, and I think there's at least a question for each of our different presenters. So I'm going to try to make sure that every presenter takes at least one question, and you can continue to ask questions as they answer. They also, as you see, all have their contact information generously shared, so you're welcome to keep asking them questions after today's event is over. So a first question for Michelle. You mentioned a professor from the biology department checking to see which pollinators are coming to campus. And one of my students wonders whether native plants inherently encourage the right kinds of pollinators to come, or is the type of pollinator less important than the availability of native and diverse pollen sources?
Well, I'll answer that one as best I can. First of all, native plants and native pollinators are co-evolved. So there's this historical connection between the two, and those native plants produce pollen and nectar that are rich in the nutrients that those pollinators need for themselves and for their offspring. So that connection is really tight and very important. There are some plants that rely on certain native pollinators, like bottle gentian relying on bumblebees in order to be pollinated. So it's a relationship that goes both ways. The organisms that do the pollination get nectar and food. The plants get the pollination. So when you bring in non-native plants, yes, they can get pollen and nectar from those as well. It may not be what they're used to and is nutritive for them. We have things like what we call cultivars that are bred for certain things like showiness or great fragrance or disease resistance, and sometimes that benefit is bred out of those plants. So providing native plants for those pollinators helps build their populations, and then they in turn help build the native plant populations by pollinating them. So honeybees are actually non-native. We've kind of gotten used to them. They're very important for a lot of our crops, but we want to help build up those native pollinator populations that are suffering right now so badly everywhere due to lack of habitat and probably also insecticide use and maybe even GMO crops. So having those native plants available to them in any way that we can, even if it's just a pot on your porch, as we mentioned earlier, is extremely valuable.
Great, thank you, Michelle. So a question that pivots to Ashley, which is about a question of sustainability, maybe environmental and economic sustainability and how they coincide. One of my students wanted to know that how you think about the fact that the Anthony Wayne apartments, which are now the most expensive option on campus, coincided with the demolition of DeRoy, which was a cheaper housing option. He's wondering how the 2030 master plan will take into account increased tuition and financial barriers for students, how essentially you incorporate different aspects of sustainability into that master plan, including economic sustainability.
Sure, and that's a great question. And one of the things that you'll notice if you read the master plan, and I didn't go into it in too much detail in my presentation, or really at all, is that the other thing that from a facilities standpoint we need to take into account is the long-term costs of operations. So how much it costs to actually operate this entire campus, but building specifically. So DeRoy Apartments was taken down primarily because the cost of operating that building, it had a lot of structural issues. It had a lot of just issues in general with the building and the way it was constructed. And so the amount of money that the university was spending on that building, specifically on maintaining and upkeep of that building, did not balance with the benefit that we were getting. And so those are really tough questions that in facilities we have to take into account every single time we look at a building. So whether it's an existing building, whether we consider building an addition or renovation or a new building. So economics is absolutely something that we look at every single day. What we need to do is we need to start looking at what we call the deferred maintenance or the maintenance backlog on our campus, the amount of it, and then what we're putting in and what benefit the university is getting out of that space. And so part of the way that you address that is that you look at your worst performers and you do analysis to understand whether or not the benefit you're getting from it is worth the amount of money that you are putting into it or will have to put into it to bring it up to standards as far as operational comfort and just, you know, overall utilities and that sort of thing. And so we really are trying to balance that. That does mean that you will probably see more, potentially more structures coming down in the next several years on our campus. And what we hope to do is actually then balance understanding what our actual needs are as far as space utilization and balance that with whether or not we build new or whether we take things down, incorporate more green spaces, even if it's temporarily or short term, and look to utilize the space that we have better before we automatically pivot to building something new. So that is something that we are, those are questions that we're constantly dealing with every day, and sustainability is a big part of that. And it's something that we are increasingly adding to and thinking about more and more as we work through. So Daryl's office falls under facilities, and so we are constantly talking about the impacts of what we're doing and how it impacts sustainability.
Thank you, Ashley. Yes, sustainability often is considered to have various pillars, and economic sustainability being one of those. So it's great to know that Wayne State's master plan has that in mind. We have a question for Nina, and it contains an acronym that I'm not 100% sure about. I'm forgetting my acronyms, but somebody wants to know how many Detroiters are impacted by GSI. And this person says they know that flooding can get pretty bad in some neighborhoods and wonders if there's any data highlighting a correlation between the two.
Well, I'm assuming they mean green stormwater infrastructure. Yep. And I mean, certainly every Detroiter is impacted by it in some way, whether they have access to it in their neighborhoods or don't. There are certain neighborhoods that tend to flood more. We did a lot of reporting this spring about Jefferson Chalmers on the far east side, where high lake levels are overtopping the canals in that neighborhood, and they've been causing flooding. Really, they've been causing a lot of flooding for the last several decades, but the last couple springs have been particularly bad. This year, the city actually installed these big orange tubes, water-filled tubes called tiger dams to protect property. So green stormwater infrastructure is something that can help address stormwater runoff. To some extent, it can help address flooding issues like what we're seeing in Jefferson Chalmers, but that's kind of a sort of different animal. That's really not stormwater. That's actually water level issues. However, I know there's a lot of work along the Connor Creek Greenway where there's a lot of stormwater runoff flooding, and that's one area that there's a lot of green water infrastructure work going on. Also on the east side. So I think it's to some extent an east side issue, although it also is an issue along the Rouge River corridor as well. So I'm not sure if that answers the question. I mean, it's a kind of a cause effect thing. The green stormwater infrastructure is a solution to flooding. So we would expect to see less flooding in areas where it's been implemented, and it's really only in the last, I think, maybe 5-10 years that we've seen significant implementation. So it's not something we've reported on as far as looking at documenting impact, but I'm sure there's studies out there that have done so. So I'm not sure if that answers the question.
Thank you, Nina. I'm going to move on to a question for Allison. We'll see, this might be our last. We might have time for one more question after this. Someone who really appreciated your Why Biodiversity Matters article and is curious about whether you've seen resistance from contractors or other parties who see that the sustainability efforts are an attempt to gentrify the city. And so that kind of question of how you navigate these in a way that feels equitable and that's really designed for communities, I think.
Okay. I think I'm not the best person to answer this question, but I can tell you what I have seen. I haven't necessarily identified resistance in that way, but with the city's sort of greater focus on making impervious parking structures pervious and including these green stormwater infrastructure projects, I think that, and also with new development, I've learned that landscape architects basically see themselves as like helping to mitigate climate change because they are so focused on ways that when they're choosing how to build these built landscapes, because they're choosing plants and other things based on what will help with stormwater and other things. They see themselves as poised to sort of help with that. So I think that regardless of what people moving in, these, you know, as TK has put it, these higher income white residents, regardless of what they want, I think that sort of the structures in place for new development may nudge people in that direction anyway.
Great. We have a giant question that I don't know if we will have time to answer, but I thought I would pose this question from Admir Medic and then also invite you to contemplate the questions our speakers encouraged everyone to think about. Admir is wondering about how severely can we damage our natural environment in cities realistically in the next 25 years, and how much chance do we have of mitigating the damage that's been done? How much can we really restore urban biomes? And I think this question, which is a sobering one, relates to the questions of imagination that our speakers asked. If you were redesigning campus to be more sustainable, including more equitable for students and community members, where would you begin? How would you begin? What does sustainability really mean, right? How do you actually get at those different tugging forces that are at the root of a sustainable future? How do you get at equity as a question as part of that? What does the future of campus planning look like to you? What do you want your city to look like in 25 years? I think that our speakers have all given us amazing food for thought. I'm so grateful to them for all that they've shared and all that they've taught us today. I'm grateful to my students for excellent questions and to our audience members for excellent questions. You have contact information, so if we didn't have time to get to your question, please feel free to interact with the speakers to continue the conversation. We hope you'll join us for more of Green Street's events. This is just the beginning of a month of conversations. We wish you a wonderful Tuesday, and we look forward to seeing you again soon. Thank you so much, everyone.